Welcome everyone back, having re-energized our bodies. Sophie started as a legal officer in Sodexo before arriving at the CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority, as legal officer for financial services. After holding several positions, with the application of GDPR, she's now dedicated to the strategy of economic co-regulation. Appointed as a professional expert by the European Commission for Credit History Files, Sophie is a well-known expert in economic professional circles. Kiki, Sophie, the next 30 minutes are for you, and we very much look forward to listening to your exchange.
And be able to talk to you. I think that your views as the CNIL's representative are most valuable. Thank you for joining Access Conference.
Pleasure is for me to see you and have this exchange and be able to join this because Mrs. Jelinek that you invited was unfortunately unable to join you today. So from the French Data Protection Authority, but speaking for the DPB, of course, we'll have this chat.
Okay, thank you. The pleasure is all ours. So, being data protection experts, let's talk about GDPR. GDPR main mission was to provide a set of standardized and commonly interpreted data protection laws across the member states. Just a few weeks ago, GDPR just became a 4-year-old child. How do you see this mission? Is it accomplished? I know that apparently the 1995 directive didn't manage to achieve this mission, and that's the reason it was replaced by the GDPR. So what do you think about harmonization? What is the degree? How do you assess the degree of consistency among the supervisory authorities and among the member states? Is it still an illusion or not?
Of course not, because you have to put that in perspective. Of course, the answer to your question is the consistency achieved? Of course not. We are on the way to do it, and we have to see from where we started. And before GDPR, the lack of consistency and uniformity was really patent. And that's the reason why the GDPR was established. So cooperation between DPAs is now part of our daily job. That's no longer an option. That's really our mission, more and more. But that's very time consuming, because it means that we have to have this common position, and being 27 authorities with still different cultural approaches is something you can't do in even 4 years. We need more time. And we think that until now we have done a lot, even if it's not enough. We have in 4 years more than 809 cooperation procedures on cross-border cases. The CNIL was a lead authority for 94 cases and was a concerned authority in 400 cases. And we have taken, you're speaking of the Europe, more than 300 final decisions, and that's around 1,055,000,000 euros fines. And there are the aspect of regulation with more than 65 guidelines and recommendations to clarify and to have a common approach. And that was to do on internal matters. For example, how to put in place the consistency mechanism, how to elaborate common guidelines on code of conduct, certification mechanisms that are promoted by the GDPR, and we really want to go faster on such mechanisms, which are at the end of the industry. And so that's interesting to have this interaction with the professionals. We know that in the near future, we need to increase this cooperation and this consistency. And how to do that, the strategy of the EDPB will be to implement a coordinated enforcement framework and establish a support pool of experts. So we are strongly dedicated to this mission, and we have to add on top of this quite time-consuming job to integrate the consistency and coherence with the new pieces of legislation. We were speaking.
We're speaking today earlier.
Today, this morning, because GDPR was the first answer, but in less than 2 years, since 2020, we have in Europe this whole series of legislative acts in order to better regulate the digital environment and to regulate the practice, the market, the dynamics. And of course, these initiatives, and I'm speaking about the Act on the Artificial Intelligence we were speaking this morning of, but also the Data Governance Act, the Data Act, the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act. And so all these pieces of legislation, we are welcoming them because they reflect a real political will to rebalance the current asymmetries in the digital ecosystem and to truly keep control of this environment dominated, as we all know, by the large platforms we were speaking this morning. And so we are really sharing this will. And we know that the key elements to guarantee the proper articulation between this text and the GDPR are what will be the coherence. So we are working and we express our opinions on all these texts at the European level, and what governance questions on the table this morning too.
And I think it's really challenging that the obstacle you have to overcome is the diversity, the national diversity. I mean, each member state has a different legislative regime, different personal data laws, and more importantly, it has different culture. So it's a bet in order to provide harmonization. And that brings me to another question. You talked about the code of conduct. I was wondering about that. I know that some time ago, in our industry, a code of conduct was endorsed by a supervisory committee. What about our case? If, let's say, another CRA copies and pastes the same provisions of the code of conduct already approved and endorsed, do I have, as a member state or as a CRA, do I have the certainty and the confidence that using the same set of provisions, my own supervisory authority is going to approve this code of conduct? Because this has to do with consistency. I mean, if one supervisory committee authority approves that, then isn't it just rational to expect that another one is going to approve it as well?
Well, I'm sorry to say no, because you have to understand that there are different processes You have national code of conduct and you have European code of conduct. And the code of conduct you are speaking about is a national one. So it means that the one giving an opinion on the code of conduct is the national authority. For example, at the CNIL, we have a dozen of national code of conduct. And when we will approve them, considering that they are consistent with the GDPR, we will have to give the information to the European Committee, acting like a secretary and putting the codes on a register for the information of everybody. Because you're right when you say that that could give the idea in another country to do the same thing. But I mean, in that case, if there are cross-border issues, that's more relevant to take the European channel, like the cloud providers have done. Yeah. And you have at the moment 2 European code of conduct. Yeah. And in that case, but it's specifically in this case that you would be right, that meaning that after the assessment done by the lead authority with 2 colleagues and all the authorities being aware of this European Code of Conduct, there would be the opinion and the consistency mechanism with the EDPB. And so in that case, you would have this consistency. So that's a possibility. But to come back to your first idea, to try to elaborate from a national code of conduct, that's still possible, either to, why not at the ACIS level, because you are representing the profession. Think about it and make a proposal, because, and you're right that that's a possibility.
I think we have already thought about it. So let me move to another question. Tell us a bit about CNIL. I'm really interested in finding out what is happening there and what is the regime in France. If you ask me, I think that CNIL acts more like a regulator and not like a punitive mechanism or an enforcement authority. I can see some supervisory committee authorities just imposing sanctions, but I think this is not the role of the CNIL. I see that you issue a number of guidelines, and it gives me the strong impression that it's more focused on regulation, on regulating, rather than punishing or auditing, maybe. So what's exactly, is my impression right? What is exactly the situation in France and in CNIL? And maybe if you could give us a feedback on the credit bureaus in France. I don't think you have private credit bureaus in France like we have in Greece.
No, effectively, you're right.
A lot of questions together. Yes. I'm thinking fast, I think.
Well, perhaps just to put it in a nutshell about what we do, we as an institution, we consider to be well balanced on our 2 legs, and we don't want to cross our legs. And so there are different legs, but the one to regulate, meaning providing compliance tools and elaborating those tools mainly with the actors, because we want to co-regulate, not to be in our ivory tower, but to understand what are the needs, what are the problems, to put that on the table and to work together. So we have, for example, worked on package of compliance package with the connected cars, with the insurance company, with the smart grids, with the silver economy. There are so many sectors to address as we are dealing with all of them. And it's why we do that on one leg. And the second leg, you're right, is the one with dealing with complaints, with the audits, with the sanctions. But we want to be balanced again. And in France, I think now, as the media are giving a lot of publicity to the sanctions, this year was 214 million euros fine from the CNIL. So, of course, they are thinking the contrary than you are, but it's true that we publish a lot of recommendation, and we try to have some specific tools, like, for example, the software to make some data privacy impact assessment. I don't know if you
we use that.
Yes, I know that was successful in Europe and translated in more than 15 languages. So we really try to help the professional bodies and public sectors to appropriate the principles and try to connect that to their own business, to really have an effective implementation of the GDPR, because that's the purpose.
So I think you will be really content to hear that we have also applied the maturity level self-assessment. And it was a really useful tool, because it was amazing how many things you can find out about your own organization if you just run this set of guidelines. It was amazing.
I'm happy to know that, because it's good to have a feedback, and usually it's always bad and burdensome, and so that's a good news. Thank you.
It was so easy to go through, and it helped us adopt some good practices, which were apparent, but no one had thought about them before. So it was a really useful tool. And also the cookies refusal mechanism, that was a great job on the side of CNIL as well. So since we're talking about the CNIL, you talked about the complaints. How many complaints do you receive annually, and what do they involve?
This last year we received more than 14,000 complaints, and we can divide them. 30%, for example, concern the internet and telecom sector. 20% of the complaints, the trade sector. 18% the labor sector, and then we go to 8% for the health sector and 7% the banking sector.
7%.
7%.
That's a really small percentage. That's good news, I think. And what about the speed of the market? How does CNIL respond to that? Does it respond timely to the developments of the market? Let's say nowadays the trend is towards open banking, open finance, open everything. Does CNIL plan to do something about that anytime soon?
We have, as I was explaining, the way we are working with the sector, the private and public sector, we have what we call compliance club with the representatives of the different financial bodies. bank, financial institutions, etc. Bank of France is there too. And so we speak about the main issues. Open finance was one of them, but you had two other subjects like granting credit and how to deal with the complaints we receive about credit scoring, because we have the problems about the persons not getting their credit and addressing complaints because they are filed in the national file of the Bank of France. But also they want to have information about the criteria taken in
the algorithms.
Yes, the algorithm. And so that is one subject we have to address this year. And another one is fighting fraud. And the financial sector wanted to go on first on how to fight fraud, and after to elaborate on open finance. We wrote last year a white paper on the development of the different ways of payment and the challenges dealing with data protection, that we published it in English too, so that may be of an interest for you. But we know that we have to go far with this subject, but that will be after the two. We have to prioritize
yes,
and to have this action plan.
You're right. And speaking of prioritization, I'd like to move in a couple of more concrete topics. I'd like to raise the topic of public data. As you may recall, last year, another supervisory committee just issued a decision by which it fined a credit reference agency for allegedly processing publicly available data in an unlawful way. According to this DPA, there was no connection between the purpose that this data were initially collected and the purpose of the credit reference agency. As you understand, this is a really hot topic for our industry and has put a lot of stress on our shoulders. So do you think that public purpose and private purposes are just incompatible? Do you think that when public data is necessary and relevant to the purpose of credit worthiness assessment, is still incompatible purpose? So how do you think about that?
I think that you are focusing on a very important subject, and we have a working group on this topic, meaning how to use what is called public data, knowing that it's not because it's freely accessible on the internet that you can use it as you want, because you have still to apply the GDPR principles. And 3 points perhaps to elaborate on this matter, because we have already some case law, not only a decision taken by the CNIL, but really because our decision may be and are more and more taken to courts of justice to contest them. And so we have position taken by our Court of Justice about the first principle being having a lawful collection of data, checking the nature and the origin of the data. And so in the case I'm speaking about, we don't have any decision dealing with your sector, and that was done by for commercial matter, for telephone conversing purposes. And so website whose general condition of use prohibit the aspiration and reuse of data for commercial purpose were not respected. And so we considered that as being unlawful. And there is this first check to do, but also, of course, to minimize the data collection to what is strictly necessary. And I can understand that in your sector of activity, everything could be interesting, and it has what is relevant, what is not relevant. To give you an example, that is a long time ago, because that was in 2007, and we had to give some prior authorization for credit scoring mechanism by banks. And in those credit scoring mechanism, we found some new criteria, not only the financial stability or professional stability, and this is less and less true as our society is very mobile, and we could see this morning some specific services for the self-employees and people like that. We have a criteria being the difference between the age of the subscriber, the person wanting the credit, and his wife or husband, I don't remember, but that was the difference of age in the couple. That was used as relevant to elaborate on the risk, and we couldn't understand this criteria, so we asked for the relevance. And that was the same thing for, there was another criteria, which was, there was a mobile phone, but not a fixed phone. Mobile.
But did you deem that this data was relevant or not?
No.
No.
And so we didn't give this prior authorization to the financial institution about that. So that's to give you some example of what
I know, but to tell you the truth, I think that bankruptcy data is really connected and closely connected to credit worthiness assessment. And that was unfortunately the case that troubled us. Since we don't have ample time, I will just move to the next topic, which I want to really hear from you. The other hot topic is legitimate interest. You do know, apparently, that CRAs have used the legal basis of legitimate interest in order to conduct business. However, recently, this legal basis has been challenged. What is your opinion? Do you think that legitimate interest is a solid legal basis for the processing of economic data or not?
I think it's a solid legal base, because it's one of those indicated in the GDPR. And for example, the GDPR is even saying that using legitimate interest for commercial purpose or fighting fraud is the right legal basis. But what I mean, I think has to be considered is that, so this interest may be very wide. I mean, it has to be formulated in clear terms and so you have to know what is it about and to demonstrate this legitimate interest, and it could include a very wide variety of interest. But what is true is that it comes to balancing this interest with the ones of the persons concerned. And I think it's where you find it difficult to articulate with the fundamental rights of the persons. That's, but it's not in the determination of the interest, because I mean, there is a wide variety of interest.
And I think that the magic word is balance. It's a matter of balance. I think that GDPR is about balancing the two different interests of the natural person and of the organization of the controller.
And that gives flexibility, because of course it's something a bit vague. It's I understand that for you it should be better to have something quite direct and applicable. But as there are general principles, obviously they apply to every kind of processing. So of course, fortunately, they are flexible, and we could see they adapt quite easily during the pandemic. It was not so obvious to try to go on with the regulation. And I see the pandemic as the stress test for the GDPR too.
Yes, it was. You're right. And all controllers are also have the burden of the principle of accountability. So being accountable and being flexible at the same time sometimes doesn't go, they don't match together. Sophie, I think we have already run out of time. I had a lot of questions to ask you. They will just remain in my notes, and maybe
No,
we can,
not at all.
We can, we can keep up during the interval.
And I can tell you that the role of such a professional body as ACIS is quite important, because that can give help and support to all the members. So if you have any questions, feel free to come back to us and to try to elaborate on that.
Thank you. We will remember about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kiki and Sophie, for this very informative discussion. I'm very glad that you did not leave anything off the table. All the hot potatoes were tackled, so that's great.